Hey y'all, my name is Leung. I'm a whiskey advisor here at Jack Rose Dining Saloon, and today I just wanted to go through a little bit of blending and playing around with malt whiskeys that I feel like can always use a little bit of undoing their buttons and just having a bit more fun. So I really wanted to keep it to bottles that you can find around DC. They're definitely not hyper expensive, so we're not going to break the bank, or you don't have to be worried about someone coming over and stealing your stash. But really, the entire emphasis for this, or the development process, came out of a whiskey that I fell in love with when I first started here at Jack Rose. So Brora is unfortunately now a closed distillery. It basically was victim to the large disinterest that we saw in American and Scottish whiskey in the 1980s and 1990s, and also in some ways a divestment of the industry away from peated malt whiskeys outside of Islay. So really on our left-hand side, we're starting with the brother distillery and kind of the successor to Brora. Clynelish exists across the street from what used to be the Brora distillery and is actually developed as a carbon copy of their stills. So we're really replicating the waxiness and the floral, almost kind of candied citrus notes that we see in Brora there, and just presenting the whole top end altogether. Something else that I loved out of the Brora distillery was its structure. So moving in with these notes that can sometimes be thought as off qualities, but sulfur and salinity and just a fantastic mineral component that's coming out of that hazelburn in the center. Here we're looking actually at the Springbank Distillery at the Campbellton region of Scotland. They remain one of the very few family-owned and pretty much independently owned distilleries in all of the country, and have held on to several distillation practices that almost everyone else has gotten rid of. Finally, on the end and contributing our peated component, we're moving into the 12-year-old cask strength expression of Lagavulin. They release this once per year under the Diageo limited releases, and it always is a fantastic, more natural representation of the distillery, getting more distillery character necessarily than maybe the 16-year-old, and just showcasing their spirit really well. And that's giving us just that bottom end, again, the peated and kind of more structural component once again. So running through kind of the recipe, which is really going to be a fairly loose term. We'll start off with an ounce of Clynelish 14. That's going to, by far and away, be the majority of our blending here. Moving through, we're just going to hit with a 1/4 ounce of this Hazelburn 10-year-old. There we are. Again, just giving us that minerality. And then finally, I'm actually going to hit a bar spoon for that Lagavulin 12. And we're just going to work with maybe half a bar spoon there. Or more, depending on your steadiness of hand. And there we are. Don't have a name for it, but just really hoping to revitalize a bit of a dead distillery and just finding flavors that we don't see in a lot of other stills. So the next part is maybe going into how we taste a whiskey like this. And I would say my first rule of thumb is never getting too bogged down with procedure that we are distracted from what's going on in the glass. So you'll see kind of people come up with rules of eyeing the whiskey, which, you know, especially in Scottish malt whiskey is very problematic because coloration can be entirely affected by E150 or caramel coloration, which is legal in Scotland to utilize. So color is, I would personally say, just about the worst indication of quality. We might be able to tell whether it's a sherry cask, we might be able to tell just a little bit of cask intensity, but really, given that caramel coloration is so rampant, and the fact that really light whiskeys can be fantastically flavorful, I don't put too much emphasis on looking at the pour, but I'll get right on into nosing. So here, I will say I usually take my first nosing about 1 inch out of the glass. The whole point, especially if it's my first whiskey of the day, is that I'm not immediately burning out my nose. So of course, whiskey at a minimum 40% ABV will be a relatively high alcohol content pour. Here we're looking somewhere decently north of that. So really kind of just right there, You can either keep your mouth open for some retro nasal activity, but honestly, again, you're more than welcome to not do that too. The whole point is that we are just kind of opening our mind to it, and just the whole point here is that we're really enjoying the pour, and we're not getting lost in evaluating, we're not getting lost in looking for flaws, just kind of sitting back and seeing everything that's happening for us. So, going into the next part, which is on the palate or tasting itself, my general rules of thumb are simply taking your time and being mindful. And that's kind of purposely vague. So the point here is that I might hold the whiskey on my palate and see what textures that I'm getting, what parts of my palate that it's activating, and also if flavors are arriving in sequence, which for me is really exciting. The fact that a pour can change on your palate and really give you 4 or 5 different sensations over a time period is something that I want to be able to experience. So holding on your palate, I think, is always a good idea. And then, being mindful is also getting to the fact that it's not just flavor that we're looking for, it's also texture or mouthfeel, as well as that sequence that I spoke of. So just not looking to be right in terms of the flavors that we're supposed to be pulling out of the pour, but just kind of, again, getting lost a bit in it. So. I personally really like this blend. It was, again, something that, a flavor set that I really fell in love with when I first started. And the last part of tasting is kind of what we're doing right now, and just being social about it. And I think that nothing replaces being across from your friend, tasting the same whiskey, and have them telling you exactly how wrong you are. So it is all about kind of sharing it. The whole point there is that they might experience it in a totally different way that shows you something that you didn't experience previously, and then it's just more fun as well. And even if I'm drinking at home after a shift and I'm alone, I might just kind of write some notes. And when I was back in my dorm room first getting into whiskey, I was taking my cues from like the Reddit bourbon and Scotch communities. There's a DC whiskey Reddit that's fantastic. And a big part of what we do here at Jack Rose is building community. So it's just so much more enjoyable when you are social about drinking whiskey, when you're not building walls, and when you're just kind of enjoying it and having fun with it all together. So that's really kind of one of my approaches to blending and how I'm usually going through a pour. And cheers, just enjoy what you have at home.